Thank you for coming out this afternoon, and thanks to Asia Society for inviting me. I'm no scholar and not much of a public speaker either, so I apologize for reading quite a bit of my presentation. As Pauline said, I'm active in Friends of the Art Museum for Chinese U. We're a nonprofit that raises money for art acquisitions and student scholarships. And our secondary goal is to learn about Asian art and culture. So we have this study group where we pick a broad topic. In this case, it was cross-cultural exchanges through art. And then each of us does a presentation with a PowerPoint on some subtopic under that main one. So I prepared this in 2016. I was a bit limited to resources only in English language. And since the exhibit's been on here at Asia Society, I've realized there's lots more information about Pan Yu-Liang out there. So I'll share with you what I found back in 2016, and I would just like to add that there's much more to learn about her, and she really is a fascinating woman. Pan Yu-Ling's life and art have inspired considerable scrutiny. She's been immortalized in several books and films. She came to my attention in 2006 during a friend's trip to Taipei, where there was an exhibition of her work at the National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts. Lu Rongji, creative director, Shanghai Modern Art Gallery, writes, "It has become more and more difficult to compile Pan Yu-Liang's life history, owing to dramatic exaggerations and an abundance of fictitious materials, including numerous biographical versions and films being circulated on the internet, distorting the historical record. The Pan Yu-Liang in the fictional world has in the mind of the public taken on a fabled life, even coming to be known as the female Van Gogh of China. It is probably true to say that Pan Yu-Liang has become the most storied female artist in Chinese arts history." Pan Yu-Liang was born in Yangzhou in 1895. Orphaned at an early age, she went to live with her uncle, who sold her into a brothel in Wuhu, Anhui, at the age of 13. Following the fall of the corrupt Qing regime, Western ideas were beginning to influence China. But concubinage persisted, women were still bought and sold, and their status in marriage and society was anything but equal. A fictional account of Pan Yu-Ling's life during this time suggests that she was involved in a homosexual relationship. But there is no conclusive evidence of this, although some of her paintings depict women together in intimate scenes. Pan Yu-Liang probably embroidered as a young girl, which would have been consistent with the time. Embroidery may have been her first introduction to creative art, leading to her interest in painting. You will notice elaborate textiles in many of her paintings, and you can see some of those here. Fortunately for Pan Yu-Liang, she was bought out of the brothel by Pan Sunhua, a Wuhu customs superintendent. Educated in Japan at Waseda University, Pan was a part of the group that pushed for youth democratic reforms, as well as a member of Dr. Sun Yat-sen's Revolutionary League. He was friends with Chen Duzhu, an early leader of the Communist Party, who introduced him to Liu Haisu, the principal of the Shanghai College of Fine Arts. Liu described Pan as a tall, strong figure with bright eyes and a sonorous speaking voice. Character-wise, he was steady and determined, full of the spirit of practical perseverance. Pan Yuliang became Pan Sunhua's concubine and second wife in 1913 at the age of 18. Pan Sunhua taught Yuling to read, and when he noticed her artistic talent, encouraged her to take up painting. He taught her calligraphy and arranged for her to learn French. Pan Yu-Liang sketched Pan Sunhua in 1926, and in 1931 painted My Family, a composition including herself and Pan Sunhua's son. The mystery of her name. Pan Yu-Ling's original surname was Chen. Her name was changed to Zhang when she was orphaned and adopted by relatives. After Pan Sunhua bought her out of the brothel, she changed her name to Pan Yu-Liang in gratitude to him. She used this name when she applied to the Shanghai Art School. However, after she was accepted, it was suggested that she use the name Zhang Yuliang to avoid attracting unwelcome attention. It does not appear that she used this name for long and returned to Pan Yu-Liang when signing her work. However, there is one oil painting with a unique signature. Late crossing the river was undoubtedly done by Pan Yu-Liang, but it is signed Pan Yu Xu. She may also have used this name after she married Pan Sunhua and before she was admitted to the Shanghai College of Fine Arts. After Pan Yu-Liang arrived in France, she changed the spelling of her name to Pan Yu-Lin, probably to make it easier for Westerners to pronounce. After her marriage to Pan, Yuliang began to study painting under Professor Hong Yi of the Shanghai Art School, who was her neighbor. With his introduction and the strong support of the school's principal, Pan entered the Shanghai School of Fine Arts in 1918. There she studied under Wang Zhiyuan and Zhu Zhizhan. Although by all accounts Yuliang was a spirited and talented young woman, she was lucky to have found supportive friends among the local intelligentsia of the time. The Shanghai School of Fine Arts was also a propitious choice for an education. Wang Zhiyuan was the director of the Western Painting Division and excelled at composing watercolor works in both the Western and Chinese style. He was active in the Shanghai art circles, but also traveled to Europe and Japan to study. He was very enthusiastic about the Western painting movement in modern China throughout his career. The principal of the Shanghai School of Fine Arts, Liu Haisu, is well known in China even today. There is a museum named after him in Shanghai, where many of his works and his collection of work from other artists are displayed. Had Liu Haisu not accepted Pan Yu-Liang into the Shanghai College of Fine Arts, invited her to return to China after her first trip to Europe, and nurtured her painting career, Pan Yu-Liang would never have been as prolific and successful as she was. It was a tumultuous time in China. The May 4 movement of 1919 was a student political, cultural, and anti-imperialist movement with its roots in Beijing. It was part cultural revolution and part social movement. During the preceding 2 decades, students had been exposed to and inspired by Western thought, creating a feeling of dissatisfaction and frustration with Chinese tradition. Intellectuals united in the New Culture movement attempted to make Chinese culture more accessible to other social groups by changing the written language. There were attempts to stop the practice of foot binding. Women who had been educated, such as Pan Yu-Liang, became a voice for further changes. The May 4 movement is seen as a catalyst for the founding of the Chinese Communist Party and is still a point of reference for China. Within the arts circle, a painters' association that upheld reform and opposition to traditional ways was formed in 1919 by members that included Pan Yu-Ling's teachers, Wang Zhiyuan and Liu Haisu. Called the Heavenly Horse Painting Society, it attracted many female painters. The horse flying through the air symbolized the energy and freedom of the group. Their annual exhibitions became a feature of Shanghai artistic life from 1920 until 1929, by which time many of the principals had gone to Europe. Intellectuals of this time encouraged study abroad. The educationist Cai Yuanpai, along with Li Shijing, initiated a self-supporting program for studying in France in 1914. With government support, Pan Yuliang traveled to France in 1921 to study. 13 other female students were her traveling companions. Curiosity and interest in Western culture led others during this period, such as Deng Xiaoping, Zhao Enlai, and Zhu Beihong, to travel to France to study. Wang Shu Yi, who is Pan Yu-Liang's companion in the latter part of her life, also came to France around this time. Initially admitted to the Lyon Sino-French Institute, Pan Yu-Liang soon entered the École des Beaux-Arts de Lyon. She next moved to the École des Beaux-Arts de Paris to study under Lucien Simon. Despite the fact that she was a foreigner with limited financial means, Yuliang began to come in contact with members of the Parisian art circle. In 1925, Pan Yu-Liang graduated with top honors from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Even more impressively, she was awarded the Grand Prix de Rome and became the first ever female Chinese student admitted to study in the National Art Institute in Rome. By 1926, she had won the gold prize for her works at the Roman International Art Exhibition, which included a 5,000 lira scholarship. Yuliang entered the sculpture class after graduating from oil painting in 1928. This time in Rome proved pivotal in her life, allowing Yuliang to assimilate the traditions of the great Renaissance of the West, as well as to undergo a traditional Western Art Academy educational process. The Western emphasis on the human body and the accompanying training influenced Yuliang for the rest of her life. Return to China. In 1928, following a chance encounter with her former principal, Liu Haisu, Pan Yu-Lin accepted his academic offer and returned to China full of hope and confidence. She accepted an appointment to teach Western painting at the Shanghai Art School. She also took part in the inaugural National Arts Exhibition, becoming China's best-known female Western art painter. Her former teachers organized a personal exhibition of over 200 of Yuliang's works, which captured the attention of art circles and the wider public. In 1931, Pan Yu-Lin took up the post of professor in the Fine Arts Faculty of National Central University, Nanking, at the invitation of a friend from École des Beaux-Arts, Zhu Jihong. During this time, she assisted Kai Yuan-Pai in establishing the Chinese Fine Arts Association. Pan Yu-Lin gave 5 solo exhibitions in China from 1929 to 1936. During this time in China, Pan Yu-Lin studied with Chinese masters, learning traditional Chinese art. She traveled extensively through China. Although this was the period in which she received the most recognition in China, traditional mores remained strong and exercised a profound negative impact on Yuliang's teaching career. Rumors about Pan Yu-Lin's past dogged her success. Her modernist works caused controversy and drew criticism in China during the 1930s, in part because she painted nudes. The painting of nudes did not become acceptable in China until the 1950s. Except for pornographic paintings that circulated privately, and the oil paintings produced by Huang Taxian for sale in overseas markets in the years of the Qing dynasty, Western-style painting in China rarely included nudity. When Pan Yu-Lin tried to incorporate what she had learned in Europe into her teaching, she came under attack. Opposition from conservative moralists were a serious obstacle to the transmission of Western aesthetics in China. During this period, China was at a crossroads. Pluralism in Western thought constituted a serious challenge to traditional values and concepts. Many Chinese intellectuals who had studied overseas threw themselves into political activity to rebuild the nation on their return home. Although Pan Yu-Lin was criticized by many traditionalists, she and fellow woman painter Guan Zhilan became favorites in the art world of the Republic of China, and they were considered modern and avant-garde. Disenchanted, Pan Yu-Lin decided to leave China. Before she left, however, she painted scenes from many different locations. She took these pictures back to France with her. The most significant painting of this time was Confucian Temple in Nanking. At the time of her painting, brothels still existed near the Confucian Temple. The painting reflects her personal experience with both Confucian teaching and prostitution. Just a few months after the painting was completed, the rape of Nanking occurred. Although Pan Yu-Lin escaped the rape of Nanking and the years of war that followed in China, she arrived in Europe in the midst of another war. While she may have felt detached from what was going on around her, the chaos and misery of the war were reflected in her paintings of that time. Pan Yu-Lin returned to France in 1937. When she arrived in Paris, she joined the faculty of the École des Beaux-Arts. The city was seized by Nazis in 1940, and her studio was requisitioned. Pan Yu-Lin moved to suburban Paris, where she painted the genocide as an indictment of Nazi atrocities. Pan Yu-Lin was invited to take part in an international exposition in Paris and to hold a personal exhibition. During the exhibit, one of Pan Yu-Lin's paintings attracted the interest of a German officer who tried to buy it for a low price. Pan Yu-Lin resisted selling her paintings generally, and she refused his offer. 2 days before the close of the exhibition, the painting was slashed with a knife. A work by another artist suffered the same fate. After she returned to Paris in 1937, Pan Yu-Liang met Wang Shu Yi. They became close friends. Wang was born in a poor farmer's home in Hebei province in 1898 and studied in France through the assistance of others in his village. He eventually opened a Chinese restaurant in Paris. Wang helped Pan Yu-Liang set up a studio, bought her art supplies, and raised money, and made arrangements for her to hold exhibitions. There are various versions of their relationship, but he supported and cared for her during her later years as she became poverty-stricken. Although Pan Yu-Liang continued to paint with oil during this time, in 1942 she began to undertake ink and color paintings on rice paper. Probably due to the high price of rice paper overseas, sometimes she also used deckled-edged paper and mulberry bark paper as substitutes. Well, as most of you probably know, the exhibit here concerns Pan Yu-Liang's work during this time, this second trip to the second period in Paris. So some of these are paintings that you'll see again when we go around with Linda. Pan Yu-Liang was elected president of the Chinese Overseas Student Arts Association in France in 1945. During this time, she issued a joint petition with members of the association, beseeching the Kuomintang government to demand Japan's return of plundered artworks during the Japanese occupation of China, as well as payment of compensation for damages to Chinese artifacts. The petition was published in Parisian newspapers on April 28. I mention this to show that although she was painting and a very creative person, she was also quite involved in political activities and still very concerned about the Chinese-French relationship. By the 1950s, Pan Yu-Liang's style of Western Oriental painting incorporated Chinese ink brush techniques with her academic training in oil painting. From Fauvism, she adopted the liberal use of colors. She adopted the dotting techniques of post-impressionism and amplified the lines and stroke work, as well as the color rendition techniques of Chinese ink and water paintings. Pan Yu-Liang was devastated when she learned of Pan Sunhua's death from illness in 1960. She hardly painted during that year. In 1963, she held personal exhibitions in San Francisco and New York and was well received by the local Chinese communities. An untimely car accident in September of that year added more pressure to her frail health. She and Wang Shu Yi began living together around this time. Although the Cultural Revolution was a tragedy for China, for Pan Yu-Liang, living far away, the ideas corresponded with her own thinking. Maoist ideology exercised a powerful influence on French thinkers. France was the first country to establish diplomatic relations with China. A self-portrait of this time shows Pan Yu-Liang with a copy of Thoughts of Chairman Mao in her hand. Most of the work produced by Pan Yu-Liang in the latter part of her career used the same materials traditionally used in Chinese ink painting. This was a bold step from her earlier use of Western materials. It may have been prompted by her meeting with Zhang Dejiang, the master of traditional Chinese ink painting, or the fact that these materials were cheaper and Pan Yu-Liang was living in poverty. Pan Yu-Liang never returned to China, living and working in Paris for the next 40 years. Her works were exhibited internationally, especially in the United Kingdom, United States, Germany, Japan, Italy, Switzerland, Belgium, and Greece. Pan Yu-Liang's final years were marred by the illness she had suffered all her life and a serious drinking problem. Since she had made no arrangements for her own funeral, Wang Shu Yi gave up the burial plot he had purchased for himself in the Montparnasse Cemetery of Paris so that she could be buried there when she died in 1977. 4 years later, he was buried with her, their names combined on one gravestone, since he could not afford another plot. Although they never married, he wanted to be united with her in death. Her art. Pan Yu-Liang was China's first female artist to paint in the Western style. She painted many pictures of women and some couples many nudes. Another favorite topic was pictures of mothers and children. She painted a few portraits in addition to still lifes and landscapes. What strikes the viewer of Pan Yu-Ling's paintings immediately is the bold composition and rich colors. Combining Chinese conceptual elements, brush strokes, and use of line with the Western framework, she developed a unique style. And the reason that I put together this slide is because I think it's so interesting to look at her still life here, completely Western. And then this picture here, also her work, that looks like a classic Chinese paintings. And then the ones in between. But I think this gives you an idea of the amazing breadth of her work. Pan Yu-Liang's paintings of human forms demonstrate her unique techniques. She tended to create outlines by well-placed and flowing strokes, followed by color renderings to create the body's texture quality. Sometimes she would use watercolors to outline forms before finishing them with ink lines. In terms of structure, she preserved the concept of leaving parts of the paintings blank, only to fill the empty spaces with crisscrossing brush strokes. She often painted herself by looking in the mirror. Pan Yu-Liang's emotional world continues to befuddle her critics. Despite her manly appearance and demeanor, she was obviously very sensitive and harbored a huge desire for love, judging from her various sketches that depict interaction between the sexes. Her origin as an orphan and her desire for a mother's love are revealed in her many paintings of mothers and children. A mother's love was a recurring theme, indicating her deep longing. The Western influence of Fauvism is evident in Pan Yu-Liang's paintings. Wikipedia describes Fauvism as the style of les fauves, French for the wild beasts, a loose group of early 20th century modern artists whose work emphasized painterly qualities and strong color over the representational or realistic values retained by Impressionism. The leaders of the movement were Henri Matisse and André Derain. The paintings of the Fauves were characterized by seemingly wild brushwork and strident colors, while their subject matter often had a high degree of simplification and abstraction. However, as Liu Rongji wrote, Zhu Beihong and Pan Yu-Liang belonged to that generation of overseas intellectuals who harbored missionary zeal for the promotion of Chinese culture. They refused to be overwhelmed by the West and insisted on integrating the best of Oriental and Western cultures. He goes on to add, that is not to say that the Chinese, with 5,000 years of cultural tradition, were not acquainted with the bold and casual brushstrokes upheld by Fauvism. The Chinese artist's familiarity with splashing techniques, spontaneity, and unpainted canvas could have endeared them to Cubism, whose sole claim to fame was the fragmentation of natural forms into abstract structures. The Chinese artists who studied in the West could not be expected to understand many of the concepts of Western modern art. Not only were they brought up in an entirely different way, they simply did not have the vocabulary to comprehend the theories of Futurism and Dadaism. An important Chinese influence on Pan Yu-Liang's work was Zhang Dejiang, the ink brush master who wrote text for some of her paintings. The sketch she made of him in 1959 is now part of the collection of Paris Modern Art Museum. So this is Zhang. This is one of Zhang's works. This is the sketch she did of him, and then this is one of her paintings where he has done the inscription. Two particular models are significant in Pan Yu-Liang's portraits. They are both from the time when she was studying in Rome around 1925. The first, Antonio, was the porter of her apartment, who became her volunteer Italian tutor. Antonio had apparently once been a rising singer, but had fallen out with various groups because of his outspoken demeanor. He took to drinking after his first wife left him for a French clown, worked as a mover until he hurt his back, and ended up as a porter in Pan Yu-Liang's building. The other important model was Anis, Antonio's goddaughter, whose parents perished in North Africa. Pan Yu-Liang looked after her, and Anis was her companion for many years. In order to raise money for Anis, Pan Yu-Liang even sold a few of her paintings. Pan Yu-Liang is famous for her nude paintings. She persisted with these even when conventional Chinese artists and others discouraged her. In this way, she was truly influenced by Western art and Western ideas about painting. When she was in China, it was difficult to find models, so it is said that she often visited bathhouses to sketch the women there, but most often she drew her own figure by looking in the mirror. In Pan Yu-Liang's later years, she created more elaborate and decorative figure groups that some felt exude too sweet a charm, especially in the faces. She was a frequent exhibitor and prize winner at the Salon. The honor of which she was most proud was the Gold Medal of the City of Paris, awarded to her in 1959. No other Chinese artist of her generation had their works shown at so many international exhibitions. Although Pan Yu-Liang is better known for her paintings, she began learning sculpture while she was in Italy. Sculpture had little status among fine arts in China at the beginning of the 20th century. However, as more artists traveled to the West, they began to create sculpture, and Pan Yu-Liang was no exception. In 1985, many of Pan Yu-Liang's works were returned to China, where they are held by the National Art Museum of China in Beijing and the Anhui Provincial Museum in Hefei. There are approximately 4,000 pieces collected in the Anhui Museum. Of these, 361 are oil paintings, 205 are signed, and only 118 are precisely dated. Zhai Difeng assisted in restoring and conserving Pan Yu-Liang's works in 2004 and 2005. He prepared the following chart of Pan Yu-Liang's signed oil paintings in the Anhui Museum by date. He notes that the period from 1939 to 1942 was the most creative oil painting period for Pan Yu-Liang. These were the years after her return to France. Considering that these do not include paintings that she rejected, those that are either signed but not dated, or unsigned, her total output during 1940 could have been as many as 100 paintings. Considering the circumstances of the time, with war, a general shortage of resources, and her own limited financial situation, this is an indication of how devoted Pan Yu-Liang was to her work and to her strength and perseverance. Thank you. I've asked Linda to help me out if you have any questions in case I don't know the answers. So does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask or maybe to add?
How was it that the paintings were returned to China? What precipitated that?
Yeah, you take it.
When Pan Yu-Lin died in 1977, she requested, when Pan Yu-Lin died in 1977, she requested that her work be returned to China. And it took them quite a long time to do that. A man named Wu Zhuren came to look at her works and to catalog them in 1980, and he recommended to the Chinese government that they be returned. By 1984, they were all sent back to the Anhui Museum. She came from Anhui province, so I'm sure that that's the reason that it was chosen as the storage site for her work.
There was a discrepancy between her birth date of 1895 and what was on the gravestone.
Yes.
4-year difference.
Do you want me to answer that? There's been speculation on why that is. Most people believe that the earlier date, 1895, is her actual birth date and that she lied on her visa application. And the reason for this is because she went there as a student, and there were age limits on students. She was 25 years old. So it meant that she could stay in France longer if she wasn't 100% truthful on her application. Maybe she liked her boyfriend, too.
Brought her closer,
Yes, maybe. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question. Since we have this exhibition, I've been to like almost all Pan Yu-Lin's lecture here, and I heard a lot about her study in France and then her teaching in Shanghai. But have you done any research on her teaching when she went back to France for the second time? I know she was also a teacher there as well.
I
I don't know anything about it. My understanding is that most of the work that she did there was through the Chinese Artist Association. So as far as I'm aware, she didn't have any formal role as a teacher. It was more sort of an ad hoc through references, so more of a tutor type role. That's all that I've ever been aware of. But as Susan said, we're not scholars. We're just people who love her work.
And how did this exhibition come about? What was the genesis, or who inspired it?
Pauline, do you want to answer, or Linda?
Actually, this is our second installment of the 20th century of Chinese female artists. The first one was last year of Wang Shu Xu Yi. And the second one this year, we are doing Pan Yu-Lin, because she is definitely one of the most important female Chinese artists of this century, especially this early century. And she is one of the very rare women able to travel to Europe to study at that time, firstly. And also she established her fame as an artist over there. Actually, it's a very, very rare example of her. She set a very good example for new women at that time. But at the same time, she faced lots of difficulties and obstacles, because she's a Chinese over there, and she's a woman. And so she's still able to stand on her feet there and to establish herself and get recognition from lots of European. So actually, she has a great accomplishment as a woman, as a Chinese woman. And also, probably, I don't know if you, maybe lots of you know about Yuliang Kusama. She is also very similar to her. She is a woman and an Asian woman. When she was in New York, she faced lots of discrimination. Even though she is quite famous and lots of people recognize her work, but she wasn't able to well received by the art scene over there because of her race. And China has pretty much the same situation, even though Yuliang was like 50 years or like maybe even 60 years younger than her. She's still facing the same situation. So we think there would be a great opportunity for us to start to discuss this issue about women artists. Even now, what's the obscure, was it any discrimination or the future for women artists, in especially Asian women artists. So next year we will have the last installment of 20th century Chinese female artists exhibition, and should be next year September, and hopefully what I know is the artists will be much younger, but still well established, and also a bit more contemporary art. So stay tuned with our website.